can you tell me how to monitor and configure the mechanism of the worker?
Hi Poppy, this question brings a very interesting perspective. So first, let's review where we are in this series. So remember, we saw first how to configure the Bonita portal, and now let's have a look to the second floor, I would like to say, how the workers are working and how we can configure it. So, how it's working. When you have a process like that one with a chocolate beverage and so on, when you create a case in that process, actually you have a lot of small different operations to execute. For example, you have to create the cases and then you have to calculate to go to the next task. When the user executes a task, then you have to calculate for the next activities, and you can have, for example, here gateways, and then the gateway you have a decision to take, or some conditions to execute, and so on. So to do that, every time you have something to execute, you have what we call a work item. So one case is created, it creates a work items, and then something has to be done to calculate the next route. All the work items are saved in the database, and actually they save as a flow node. And then with the flow node, we can calculate will be the next work item. So when you have a list of work items, you have a pool. Okay, you have a pool of worker, and this pool is by default 10, and then one thread, because a worker is a thread, take one item from the list and execute it. So every time you have some execution from that list, and when it's done, of course, every time it's saved in the database. That's why when something arrives, the engine stops suddenly. No worry, because what is important is what you have in the database. At one time, you may have a lot of processes and a lot of cases executing at the same time. So what happened here? You may have at one moment here a lot of items and a lot of database, and you may have more items that you have in your database that you have possibility in the list, and then you have an overflow. In that circumstance, everything is still in the database, no worry about that, but the list keep only a certain amount of records. That means all the record after will be saved in the database, but not in the working queue. That means this item will not be executed at all, never. You have to restart the Bonita server, then you will read again from the database, and then you can process this item. So that's the first main parameters you have to pay attention. This is the number of items in your list. So how can you get this information? Let me use here a car. This name is page of drill car, and you can access all the configurations in your Bonita engine. And what you have to look here, it's this information in that files. I never written the name of that files, but here is the information we look for, the work services, and this is the queue capacity. So you see by default you have a very, very big number, so it should be enough, but it's one of the parameters that you have to monitor, because if you go over at one time over than this number, then the next work will be saved in the database, but not processes. And here you can see you have another, this is the maximum pool size on the worker. That means this is the number of worker you have maximum. A startup, it starts by 10, and it go up to 10, because it's a dynamic pool. So if you go more than 10, then the core size, and you will enlarge the number up to 10. Okay, but you can change that in the configuration, and then you have to restart your server. So that's the main parameters to understand here. This is the queue capacity. And the second is the maximum pool size. This is the maximum number of workers. What happens at the startup? When the Bonita server starts, it checks and it loads all the work in the database and it recreates the list of work items. And then the pool of worker is working, and then it's okay. You can do the job as usual. Just have a look on the cluster. So the cluster is a Bonita subscription features. On the cluster, you have multiple nodes, and all the nodes work from the same database. At startup, the first node loads everything from the database, and then it does the job, the panning job. When the other node starts, it checks from the database, but all the work are already locked by the first node, so they does nothing. So you have a lot of panning work at the beginning. Then all the first node take all. First in, take all. And so the first node can have the CPU for 30 minutes or 2 hours working 100% when the other node on the cluster does nothing. And the cluster is just due to the load balancer. When the user creates a case on the second node, for example, then all the other part of the job will be executed on the second node. And when, for example, Ellen Kelly creates a node on a case on node 4, then the first part of that case are executed on node 4. And then if you have a human task, and Walter Bay takes and executes the human task on node 2, that means all the other part of the worker will be done on node 2. That's the way the cluster works. So I hope it's clear now the way the workers are running and the mechanism. So let's now simulate it with a real case and load a server to see what's happened. Follow me in the next video to do that.